Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Market Disruptor Show. And today I am joined by Brady Swenson. He's the host of the Citizen Bitcoin podcast, also head of marketing and education at Swan Bitcoin, a company I talk about quite a bit. And today we have a very exciting topic, one I'm happy to dig into, about a renaissance. It's a message of hope today. We're going to use historical references, which you know I love to bring, and talk about hope of a better future that I'm pretty excited for. So anyway, Brady, thanks for joining.
Absolutely, Mark, man. I'm a big fan of yours. Really glad that we've gotten to know each other a bit better through doing some business and talking Bitcoin, and happy to be here. Thanks for the time.
Yeah. So, I'm excited for this conversation today because sometimes people say I talk too much gloom and doom, and it's because the stuff going on today
not to.
Yeah. I mean, the stuff going on today is doom and gloom. But on the other side of this is amazing hope. And so that's what I want to talk about today. We'll talk about the doom and gloom, and then we'll talk about the hope. But anyway, Brady, just give us a little bit of background on what you're doing so kind of people get a reference of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am head of education at Swan Bitcoin. We launched about 14 months ago, something like that. So we're still relatively new on the scene, but we are the easiest, fastest, safest way to accumulate Bitcoin. We have automatic recurring buys, instant buys. We can do wire buys up to $10 million. We're kind of inching our way out toward the international scene. Right now, we're just focused on the United States. So that's what we do. As my title suggests, we're really focused on providing Bitcoin education. We think that the more you learn about Bitcoin, the more comfortable you are, buying Bitcoin, accumulating it, developing that conviction. So we have, to that extent, published a bunch of blog content. We publish on YouTube. We have a couple of weekly shows, one called Swan Signal Live, on which you've been a couple of times, where we pair up guests and talk about economics and Bitcoin. We also do Swan Lounge, which is kind of a fun hangout show on Fridays. We're really ramping up the YouTube show. Of course, we publish those as podcasts. We have a book coming out. We publish some ebooks. We're doing webinars. So we just do a bunch of educational content, and that's really our focus. We try to make most of our marketing efforts educational.
Yeah, I love that for so many reasons. And one of the biggest reasons I love that is because, in order to, I always tell people, before you buy anything, you need to know what it is that you're doing. Like, why am I buying this? And what am I expecting? And all that comes through education, right? It all comes through education. 100%. Education is the edge, right? That's the edge that you can get. But also it helps with perspective. By the time this video goes out, you'll have seen a new video on YouTube that I just finished recording. And I was talking about a historical narrative of the Weimar Republic in Germany. Mm-hmm. And how that inflation crept up on them and what happened. And I used that, and then I pulled the narrative, and I'm not going to spoil it. But the reason why I showed that is because people thought, oh, if I would have just, bought here and sold here, I would have made a bunch of money. But if you didn't understand what was really going on, if you weren't educated, it wasn't a smooth ride, and you would have gotten shaken out. And so education is that edge. I also like to say, I'll plug one thing. I think we have one of the biggest asymmetric opportunities in the world in front of us, and that's more upside than downside. And the way you get asymmetric upside is through having asymmetric information. Yep. And so I'm working with Swan. I have a new email going out, and I'll put a link to it down below. You can sign up for my email. It's called the Asymmetric Edge, and it gives you that information you need. So I'm going to just plug that real quick since we're talking about it. But let's dig into this historical narrative. And I always try to bring that forward. And what does that tell us about the future? And so we're going to kind of talk about this Renaissance 2.0, where we both agree, I think, see the same future, that there's massive prosperity in front of us. Yep. But going back, right, I think there's a historical narrative between the Roman Empire, the Dark Ages, and into the Renaissance age, the Enlightenment age. That is kind of a good analogy of where we're at and where we're going. Why don't you kind of set that up for us? Hey guys, let me just interrupt this interview real quick just to plug the show sponsor, and that is BlockFi. Now, BlockFi is doing amazing things in the Bitcoin finance space. As a matter of fact, they've cracked some really big news by bringing on the ex-CFTC chair, Chris Giancarlo, and they are one of the most transparent, most heavily regulated companies inside the United States, which gives me a lot of trust into what their services are. Now, I've recently did a video talking about how to retire off of Bitcoin, and you can do that by leveraging debt and interest against Bitcoin, and BlockFi is the the number one company in the United States or maybe in the world to go to and use. They are leading the charge. They're paying interest on your Bitcoin if you park it with them, or you can borrow against it. Now, as I broke down in that video, you can borrow against your Bitcoin. And when you take debt against it, it's not taxable. It's not a taxable event. You can use that debt for anything that you want, including to live off of, to leverage up and buy more, or roll it into another asset. You can do something like I've done recently, like sell some real estate, put that money into Bitcoin. Now, as that Bitcoin price has risen, I'm able to borrow against it and go back and buy the same real estate or something similar. And I still own the Bitcoin, and I also own the new asset as well. Lots of ways you can do this. And BlockFi is the company that I recommend. Down in the description, I have a link that you can click on. If you choose to use that link, you can earn up to $250 in Bitcoin just for using that link. So check out BlockFi now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the era that we're in right now is not an aberration of history. We've had eras of fiat money all throughout history. We've had eras of sound money all throughout history. And it's a pendulum that sort of swings back and forth. And studying that history really gives us some insight into what's coming next. And so one of the eras that I have really liked to take a look at is the Roman Empire. And one of the things I've learned through studying Bitcoin is that money is the foundation of civilization. It is the way that we advance civilization. We create technologies because we communicate our needs, our wants to other people. And those the way that we effectively and efficiently communicate those needs and wants, especially over long distances of space and over time as they accumulate generation after generation, is with money, is with prices. So we set a value on certain solutions by a price, at a price, and we establish that price. So that's really a communication. It's a language, and that language lays the foundation of our civilization, the way we advance over time. So the quality of our money matters very much, and of course, when we talk, keep in mind, of course, I'm not, as we're talking about this, there's a lot of variables that go into the rise and fall of empires, but like I said, this is the foundational cause, right? And so
And that's
Rome
because
times,
just to
yeah,
dig and just to dig in, sorry to interrupt, but just
no,
to
it's
kind
good.
of help you set that base. If price signal, if money works as price signal, and that is communication. And so,
Right.
of course, it's obvious to anybody that if you can't communicate properly, you can't coordinate and you can't grow. And so that's why countries are formed and they have their own language and they can all work together. And so that's just yeah. So when that communication gets messed up, then you can't function together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's just it's more efficient to have one language when it comes to markets and
Right.
economies, and that's sort of the Tower of Babel story from the Bible, and
Yep.
this era where we've had nationally enforced fiat monies. It hasn't allowed the global economy to operate efficiently. There's just there's a lot of noise in the signal, and the promise of Bitcoin is that we're going to really make that signal a lot clearer. And we have, the technology it's built upon is a global communications technology, and not coincidentally, the way that the language of money is now going to be spread instantaneously across the world in the same voice, the same language, the same code. I think will lead to what we're gonna talk about here is a renaissance.
Yeah.
So let's look at the Roman Empire as kind of instructive, and then going through the Middle Ages and then to the Renaissance. So the Roman Empire was extremely successful, and it was based on a money called it was a gold coin called the Arius. And this was sort of the international settlement money. And it was first minted by Julius Caesar, and it was 8 grams of pure gold. And eventually, over time, it became, there was a decision made by a Roman emperor to reduce it to 6.5 grams of gold. That was at the kind of the beginning of the 2nd century to fund empirical expansion and wars. And then it was replaced by a 4.5 gram solitis, where they renamed the coin because they had debased it. So the purity of the coin itself, the purity of it was never debased, but the weight of it was debased as government spending began outpacing revenues.
Right.
And this went on for centuries. Now, there was a complement to these gold coins. And like I said, those gold coins were international settlement, big nation states and empires settling between each other, large merchants, et cetera. But there was a silver coin for your, everyday person. And the deflation or debasement of the gold coins, the Aureus and the Solidas, really paled in comparison to what happened to the denarius,
Right.
which makes sense. It's sort of a cancel-on effect. The money that the everyday guy was using suffered the most debasement, and we're seeing that today as well.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
yeah.
and then tell us about the denarius. Let's talk about the denarius. Then I want to dig into that a bit. So then the denarius was a
Okay.
silver coin, and
Yep.
I mean, the same thing happened where that got debased. And
Yep.
I guess the parallel that I'd like to pull just from this segment before we keep going, so
Mhm.
people can understand this historical narrative, is that most people probably know about the Roman Empire, and they, basically kind of took over the world at that point.
Yeah.
In time, and as they needed to continue to grow, to continue to increase their empire, they needed more money,
Right.
but they didn't have any more money. So what did they do? They debased it, which means they took a big coin and made it a small coin. By making it smaller, they got more. Same
Right.
thing happened with the denarius, right? It used to be full silver, then it was 90% silver, which gave them 10% more money, 80%, etc. And so the narrative that I like to pull, that historical reference, is just that they needed more money to expand the empire and continue their social programs. They didn't have it, so they just made the money worth less and less and less. And so we obviously
Exactly.
can see that parallel today.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just don't have the revenues coming in, and taxes are unpopular, and they were back then as well. Led to uprisings and a lot of complaints. And so the easier way to tax, the easier way to raise more revenue for the government or the empire is just to debase the money. And that sort of insidious tax is a lot easier to kind of sneak past the populace.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so the denarius began as 4.5 grams of silver, and it stayed that way for centuries under the Roman Empire. And this helped, not coincidentally, it was a foundation of civilization for the Roman Empire, and it was very healthy for trade, for commerce, for artisans, producers of solutions to the needs and wants of other Roman citizens. And they could rely on that to be a consistent measurement of value over centuries. So as Rome began to grow, the Roman Empire began to grow. Kind of started at the top with the debasement of the Aureus. But then base metals started being combined. That's another way to debase money. Base metals that were more common in I guess the Earth's surface, then silver began to be mixed in with the coins. So they would have copper cores, for instance, or they would be blended with silver. And so throughout the first century, the AD, the denarius was debased in just 100 years by over 95%. So
Right.
it was by 350 AD. It was all but worthless. Had an exchange rate of 4,600,000 denarius to a gold solidas. So they experienced what you talked about in your previous video, inflation, Weimar Republic-like inflation,
Right.
caused economic chaos. And the population of Rome, which was at one point a peak of about 1 million inhabitants, probably if not, the largest city on the planet, if not the largest. There was probably some competition from Eastern empires as well. But by the 5th century, 150 years after the hyperinflation of the denarius, it was down to 50,000 people. It really just destroyed the empire. And one phrase that I like from this era to use is bread and circuses.
Yeah.
And it means that it came from a Roman poet. It means offerings like benefits or entertainments that are intended to placate, or the discontent and I guess just distract from the policies and failures economically and
Yeah.
monetarily
Yeah.
that the empire has inflicted.
Yeah, that's a great piece to kind of stop right there, because
Yeah,
kind of get that historical perspective again. So the Roman Republic saw massive prosperity. They had a good sound money. They were able to freely trade, which allowed people to specialize and get good at what they were doing. So then there was, all these new things that were created, and inventions, whatnot. But as the Roman Empire started to decline, debasing their currency, it started falling apart, not just from a monetary standpoint, but even from a societal standpoint.
yeah,
And so, to your point about the bread and circuses, the government changed to where they used to rotate in and out all the time to keep people kind of fresh. And then they got to lifetime politicians, and we saw massive corruption that started happening.
yeah,
Sound familiar? Then we had lots of people that had, money problems, and they were very unhappy. And so they created these bread and circuses, bread being welfare, circuses being entertainment. Well, if we
yeah,
give the people bread and we keep them entertained, maybe we'll keep them at bay a little bit. And does that sound familiar again? Right. So
yeah.
that's a good historical perspective. And then what happened after that?
Well, that was plunged into the Dark Ages
Right.
after that, and the empire broke up. The sort of knowledge of why that happened was sort of lost to history, and the ideas of money were sort of lost. There was all kinds of infighting. The you know ability to establish commerce again was took quite some time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was obviously a dark times called the Dark Ages for a reason.
Yeah.
And then we emerged from it, and we can talk about some of the reasons why the Renaissance was able to be born.
Yeah, yeah, I want to talk about that. So just real quick onto that Dark Ages, Rome was basically taken over by the barbarians, and I think they just destroyed everything. So
Yeah,
all that literature and all that history that kind of showed why it was great and how it was great before was kind of lost.
yep,
So history was destroyed, history was lost. And then almost like people didn't have a template. They didn't know what to do. There was no good historical references. And again, another historical reference is, I mean, it's kind of easy to see how history is kind of being rewritten. Like history is under
yeah,
attack right now,
yep,
and that's bad, because that's our guide. As we can see from the Roman Empire going to the Dark Ages. So that's another great historical reference, I think. And then with all that information, all that education gone, they didn't know what to do, and they basically had to rediscover it all again. So they kind of had to
yeah.
start all over with no frame of reference. So then, yeah, go ahead and keep it going.
Yeah, so it was born again in Italy. So which makes sense that the core of that knowledge, sort of the embers of the fallen Roman Empire, were still sort of burning in Italy and in that area. And so in the medieval Renaissance, the florin was born, and these these families that we know of, like the Medicis, these big banking families, they eventually invented modern banking. They were merchants, and they either rediscovered or somehow, through some beneficial like happenstance of history, were able to rediscover this idea of sound money and how important it was. So the a thing here, I think, that's uh, crucial to note is that the Medicis understood very clearly the value of sound money and maintaining the measurement, the signal of that value over generations.
Yeah.
So the florin was stable for 300 years. And this was the foundation of the Renaissance civilization.
Right.
It was used widely beyond the borders of the Republic of Florence. It was the most trusted money. It became reliable, because people far and wide knew that the florin was going to be worth the same amount now as it will be in 10 or 15 or 20 years. It was a reliable store of value. That's what made it the best money.
Yeah. So another thing that I like to look at from that kind of period that kind of helped usher in that change also was you had kind of a new technology. So technological revolutions. I'm kind of working on a thesis on that. And
Mhm.
we had the invention of the printing press.
Yep.
And with the invention of the printing press, we were able to start getting information out to people that typically wouldn't have ever gotten that information. And
Yeah.
so I think there's two key pieces there that I like to look at. One, it was this decentralization of information, whereas before
Mhm.
information was centrally controlled and had to kind of just be told, spoken, or passed down. But all of a sudden now it could be decentralized and spread out to everybody. Everybody got the
Yeah.
information. And then that that just kind of snowballed where now there was exchange of free ideas and people built on top of that.
Yep.
And then you got the sound money again, which one gave people that kind of that good communication again. But also, I think the key piece was that because it was globally accepted, it opened up free trade. So it expanded the amount of free trade and communication and
Yeah.
information and ideation and all these things. And so with the information and the sound money, it was just an explosion.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. And that's an, it comes down to language, right? And being able to communicate to one another in such broad and broadly like that in such a broader way made a massive difference. And that comes down to basically the power of language to travel far and wide. And money is just a form of language, it's a way to communicate value. So being able to, for sound money to reach far and wide was it really enabled just a flowering and explosion, a blossoming of commerce all over Europe. And eventually we saw, other uh, very prosperous, merchant cities in the Netherlands and Germany, eventually in Britain, Spain. So all over Europe, centers of commerce grew through the trade of free ideas and the trade based on sound money. Now there were other currencies, but eventually like the settlement currency among large merchants and even in some cases everyday people was the florin.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Yeah.
think, for people that haven't studied this at length like we have, for years, sometimes they don't realize like how deep this really goes. Where it's like, okay, you had to sound money, okay, whatever, right? But like they don't understand like all the effects of money and like what sound money is. And so
Yeah.
it really comes down to, when I have a way to store my energy to be used at a later date, um, it changes my mindset. So I have like this longer term perspective, but then it allows me to go pursue other things that could be of benefit to other people.
Mhm.
So I could invent a new technology or whatever. And then because that money, that communication is universal. So just like, English and Spanish don't match up, but the money does, right? And so now you're sharing those ideas with even more people. So if I'm
Mhm.
forced to just, work 12 hours a day just to survive and get my
Yeah.
food and get my clothes, I don't have any time to communicate and share ideas and invent. But when I can, it's just hard to even comprehend or state like how powerful that is.
Yeah, it's again, that's how civilization advances. And
Right.
the faster that can happen, the more efficiently that can happen, the faster civilization can advance and the faster it can spread to everyone, right? We
Hmm.
often say that the future's here, it's not evenly distributed yet. That's been the case for a long time. And there's still lots of people around the world that are waiting for the benefits of technologies that have been around for decades that, more privileged societies have had access to. And what we're
Yeah.
seeing now with like the internet and what I hope will happen, and be aided by Bitcoin is the access to the means of make taking advantage of the information that's available in in a growing number of pockets, literal
Yeah.
pockets, people's pockets around the world, in the form of internet enabled devices.
Yeah.
So these people will have a way now to receive money through those devices over the internet that they will actually be able to hold in a self-sovereign way and know that it's not going to be debased, confiscated, and they can rely on it to grow some wealth for their family
Yeah.
and pass it along and make your family richer and richer over time. And this is what we used to call the American dream.
Right.
This is the first generation now, I think, in the history of America that will be financially, in terms of wealth, worse off than the previous generation. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's not
Yeah.
the way it's supposed to be.
Hey, sorry to interrupt this video just one more time. I'm not running Google ads, so it's actually way less interruption than I normally would have on a video. And that's because it's sponsored by BlockFi. They are opening up the world of Bitcoin and financial products, offering to pay you interest on your Bitcoin, better than owning a rental property that you have to manage and control and have the risks. You can just earn interest on it, or you can leverage against it. Now, I plan to hold my Bitcoin forever and literally never sell my Bitcoin. So how do you do that? Well, if I need money, I don't want to sell that Bitcoin. I'm going to pay tax on it. All right. I'm going to end up with less, and I don't have the Bitcoin anymore. So a better way to do it is to borrow against the Bitcoin. So I've put all my money into Bitcoin. If I want to buy a car or I want to buy a house, I can borrow against it at very, very low competitive rates, get my house, get my car, whatever that may be, and get to keep the Bitcoin. Now, I've done a whole video on this. You can find it. I'll link it down in the description below, how to retire off of Bitcoin without paying taxes. And you can do that with BlockFi services. I'll link to the video down below. I'm also going to put a link to BlockFi. If you choose to click on that link to check them out, you can earn up to $250 in free Bitcoin just for using that link. And that's it. Let's go ahead and get back to the interview. So if we go back and take some of those historical reference we kind of set up and then kind of look at how that fits kind of into more now times, one thing that catches me is that, like I said, the Roman Empire kind of had this figured out, and then the barbarians kind of destroyed all that, and they kind of lost their way. And I look at like stuff like the founding fathers wrote down for us. Like they told us, they put down warnings, and they were so smart, right? They didn't have the internet. They didn't have social media. So all they did was sit and read and like converse all day. And so they had all this time to think about philosophy, and they studied, Greek and Roman history. But like I said, they left all these warnings for us, and it seems like we've lost our way. We've lost all that information, and maybe even purposely not being shared.
Yeah, perhaps, certainly, because there's a lot of power in the printing press in
Right.
controlling it. So yeah, it certainly would be a massive incentive to keep that information away from
Yeah.
the general public. I can't remember who it was. Maybe it was Henry Ford who said that if people understood the way the banking system worked, there'd be riots in the street by tomorrow.
Yeah. Before morning, he said, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's the founding fathers. There were many of them who were adamantly against central control of money and
Yeah.
adamantly against paper money. Meaning because they knew that by allowing someone to print paper money, that it would be easily debased. George Washington wrote a letter to Thomas Jefferson about just in very, very stark language, basically that, paper money has done, ever as it will do in your colony, in basically your state before it was a state, and which is to lead to down every road of ruin. So yeah, there's Alexander Hamilton as well. So very much against central banking. There was heated debates about including it in the Constitution to forbid central banking. It didn't happen. And we went back and forth. There were wars, basically major battles, intellectual battles, and sometimes even physical battles over the establishment and, the destruction of central banking up until 1913 when we established Federal Reserve.
Yeah. Yeah. If you study that history, you'll see that the central bank was established and destroyed multiple times before it finally took hold, as you said, in 1913. And so many quotes. I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I mean, I think Jefferson said like central banks were more dangerous than standing armies. He talked about how it would enslave us, how it would enslave our children. And so they told us and they warned us. And now here we are trying to figure this out again. So kind of like what happened. But now shifting to a little bit of hope, I think we are starting to see this new Renaissance 2.0 setting up, and it does give me great hope. One of the big catalysts, so if we go back, I think the two pieces from the Dark Ages to the Renaissance were both information education and sound money. And so if we look at the information education piece, I think we have, we had the explosion of the internet, which is kind of similar to the printing press. Now, the printing press kind of preceded The Renaissance, sort
Mhm.
of like the internet has preceded what's happening. But, we're seeing people, I mean, people are watching this right now. Like, what the
Yeah.
heck? Like, why are people
Right.
interested in this? People are using the word fiat. Like, nobody used the word fiat before, right?
It's
Nobody
true.
cared about the history of money. But all of a sudden now, there's a renewed interest that I'm excited for, and there's this free flow of ideas. And I know you're head of education. I mean, you're on it even
Yeah.
more than I am. So let's talk about that.
Well, we're both educators, Mark, but
Yeah.
yeah, it is an amazing time in that sense. The free flow of ideas, the freedom of information is incredibly important to individual freedom. And we have seen the internet and the ability to communicate peer to peer have drastic impacts on the ability of people to resist tyrannical power, for instance, the length that countries will go to. China has a massive firewall on the internet. North Korea's is even more restrictive because they understand the danger of the freedom of information to their power. Now, this is one of the greatest things that the founding fathers, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights has given to Americans: the freedom of speech. And it's too bad that the not allowing central banking didn't make it in, but the freedom of speech did, and that's important. And in fact, um, this is just an interesting side note. The encryption that Bitcoin is based on, SHA-256 and other related encryption algorithms, were actually challenged by the U.S. government to be made into military-grade munitions,
Right.
essentially, and so that they could be controlled, their export could be controlled, right? And the courts, the Supreme Court, eventually ruled that cryptography is a form of language, and therefore it's protected under the First Amendment. And the same exact arguments can be made about Bitcoin. So if there were ever some kind of state level attack on that in a legal sense made on Bitcoin, I don't think that's going to happen at this point. But if there ever were, it would fall under First Amendment protections. This is just a language, and we
Yeah.
have the freedom to communicate in that language over the
Yeah.
internet. It's just a bunch of words and letters in the code. So
Yeah.
um, so yeah, freedom of information, massively important. And I think you're right that it creates this sort of fertile ground, and the
Hmm.
printing press created a fertile ground for the advent of the Renaissance. And so it's language is the foundation of civilization. Money is just
Yeah.
another form of language, right? So yeah, I think with Bitcoin, and like you said, the combination of the internet and other exponential technologies that are developing, which we can get into if you want, but
Yeah.
it's mind blowing what's
Yeah.
happening, and we have no idea how to process what's going to happen, not
Yeah.
only with the advent of Bitcoin, but just the telescoping evolution of technology and
Yeah.
how fast things are changing now. We just can't grasp it. Our monkey brains can't grasp it. So
Yeah.
yeah,
You.
the freedom of information, the freedom of self-sovereign money is
Yeah.
going to change things drastically.
You had said something earlier that was great. It's something that I pay attention to a lot. I'm actually reading F.A. Hayek's book, The Constitution of Liberty, right now,
Yeah.
and I got this from him. But he was talking about how it's, and you said this, it's the speed of ideation, right? So
Yes.
it's about trying over and over, and the faster, the more tries we get, the more we're going to do, right? And
Yep.
so you had said that earlier, and it's totally right. And it just made me think. If you look at like the printing press sped up the amount of information that was getting to people instead of being centralized by one person and I can only
Mhm.
relay to that one person or to a small group of people. Now books could go out and flourish, right? So it sped up that information. And then I was just thinking about the parallel to the internet, where the internet, before the internet, we had lots of books. Obviously, the printing press has been around. But if you think about
Mhm.
that, one, it takes somebody, potentially years to research and write a book.
Yeah.
And then it could take me weeks or months or however long to read a book. So like
Sure.
how fast that is. Now it was faster than me having to travel to talk to somebody word of mouth, right? And it got to more people. But then think
Yeah.
about the speed difference in the internet.
Yeah.
And also the way that we get information. Now, I love books and I've read thousands of books and I still read books. I'm reading Hayek's book right now. I'm actually working on three or four books right now.
Yeah.
But my education shifted a lot and, shifted from for a while. I didn't read books for a couple years and it was all podcasts and like YouTube
Hmm.
videos. So it
Yep.
was even, and part of the reason why is because it's faster, more relevant information. And so it just
Yeah.
kind of speeds that up. So that's what the information or the internet really did. And instead of just having to go to a bookstore that had limited selection of books, it's opened up the whole world back to that kind of free trade, kind of like what happened in the Renaissance, where the whole
Right.
world was able to kind of freely exchange. So the internet is that times a million or whatever, right?
Yes.
I mean, it's
Right.
way faster.
Yeah.
Um,
You're absolutely right. Yeah, it's the point you make about how books are sort of these like longer term ideas, these more evergreen ideas, because books take a while to publish and disseminate, and so they could be out of date relatively quickly. And then we had the advent of like pamphlets and newspapers to disseminate information more quickly, the relevant like new information. And now, like you said, like the internet does that instantaneously around the world at the speed of light.
yeah,
And so we're all on Twitter. Twitter's sort of like this distributed AP newswire, and we can all
yeah,
just talk to the best thinkers in the world, and we can get their takes on news, and we can curate our feeds based on people that we trust and whose takes we appreciate. And it's incredible, man. It's
yeah,
incredible. And so it's led to, just like the printing press did, but again, a million times more, an
yeah,
absolute explosion of the transfer of ideas.
yeah,
And I like the idea, that I think it was Richard Dawkins about, he really coined I think he coined the phrase meme, or the name meme, which is the sort of, he had this sort of like theory about memes or ideas that were sort of like genes, right? That would, you know, combine themselves and sort of transcend or create something new when they would combine in human brains. And so we have all these memes, which are in broader sense just ideas, but we also have this sort of art form of language that's been developed on the internet, which we call memes. So there's that kind of meme as well. And those ideas are just being transferred in directly into people's brains so quickly, and we're all thinking about things. And like, just take Twitter for instance, it's like a crucible for the best ideas in Bitcoin. And this is where Bitcoin sort of has its battle of ideas about how it's going to develop, about what it means to the world, about how we should communicate that,
yeah,
all of those ideas to the world. And we distill them down into this list of like a couple hundred, maybe 100 Bitcoin memes that we have that are 2, 3, 4 words long.
yeah,
And so it really helps us kind of learn how to communicate. We all work on that together. It's a
yeah.
distributed collaborative marketing system,
Yeah, yeah. One more point on that, and then I want to move on to the second ingredient, which is that money. But one more
Mhm.
thing I was just thinking was also like before the printing press, you just kind of had very centralized information. You got it from your teacher, who got it from their teacher, whatever. The church kind of held a monopoly over religion, and then the people got the Bibles, and they said, "Wait a minute, this is not what it says." But it was the decentralizing of the information. And
Yeah.
then if we look at the internet, it's decentralized information times a million again. So
Yep.
that's super powerful. And then we have another technology that's even decentralized even more. And so that takes us back to the second ingredient, which turbocharges. When you add these two together, it's they compound, and that is that money. So we have now for the first time a new technology that I think it's much bigger than money, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
much bigger than money. It's in my opinion, and what I'm working on this thesis, it's a technological revolution that will change the way humanity works. It's not a new
Yeah.
technology, it's a technological revolution. And so calling it money is too small. But to the point of what we're talking about, it's borderless, right? So it's global, and it can
Yep.
speed up that free exchange of information and trade. And so yeah, so what are your thoughts there?
Yeah. Bitcoin is, the implications of it are incredibly deep. And that's why we can spend years and years talking about it. We have thousands of podcast episodes. We have hundreds of incredible essays. We have books that are just being published by the dozen now. And we can continue to have these conversations because there's so much here and we're learning about the extent of what it is. Now, the first thing that we come to understand about Bitcoin is that it's a money. And you know, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. I like to say that we're all default Keynesians, right? We're all by default believe or understand that the government controls the money. That's how money works,
Right.
and that's just the way things are. A couple of generations have come up this way since, you know, early 1970s. I didn't know anything different. I was born in 1979, so this is just the way money was.
Right.
And so when I found Bitcoin, I learned, it taught me what money really is. And I went through college. I had, you know, classes in high school and college, micro, macroeconomics, business
Yeah.
classes, finance classes, never mentioned anything about what money is and the history of money and how it should function in society.
Yeah.
Um, and so to that extent, like it's hard to um, argue against the idea that it's at least some kind of unintentional conspiracy, because there are incentives for these you know, institutional universities and et cetera to teach this kind of new form of economics, to provide this stable of quote unquote economists to write papers about, you know, econometrics and these massive models that are, you know, use lots of complex math, because we have the conceit that we can understand and better manage an economy than a natural money can. So yeah, it's going to fundamentally change everything because we're returning to a sound money. Now I know what money is. So that's the first thing. What is money, right? That's the question that really leads you down the rabbit hole. But then, yes, of course, there's so much more to it than that. And I think we have we have 100 analogies to try to understand and
Yeah.
describe Bitcoin. But one that I am, you know, really enjoying thinking about right now is, you know, Bitcoin is energy,
Right.
and it is stored energy. It's
Well, all money,
literally,
that's what money is stored
that's what
energy.
money is.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin does it so efficiently,
Right.
right? It does it so efficiently. It literally just directly turns energy into money. That's exactly what mining is. So it's the perfect transfer of energy into money,
Yeah.
and it's fascinating.
To kind of, I mean, just to even try to attempt to show like how powerful this is, I look at what, you know, is happening in civilization today, in society today. And so back to money as energy. So just to set that up real quick, let's say that I have to dig holes, right? And if I
Right.
dig holes for 8 hours a day, I'm expending my energy. I'm burning calories, right?
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
expending energy to dig holes. I could decide to work an extra 4 hours one day, extra energy expend that I could hopefully save, store that value to be used at a later date and time. And I want to make sure that that maintains its power, not loses it, like a battery, right? You want it to be able to store that energy. The problem that we have, you know, as the Roman Empire had, debasing that currency in the United States, is you know, with being able to store that energy for use at a later date, then I'm free to go specialize and be the best brain surgeon I can be, or the best, you know, coder or engineer I could be, whatever. The problem that we have when our money doesn't hold its value is I'm forced to go become an investor. So now instead of spending all my focus and energy on creating new technologies that serve, you know, solve problems and serve needs, now I can only spend half my time, because the other half of my time I'm forced to be able to find a way to not lose my energy that I've saved up.
Yep. Yep.
And think about, I mean, if you can just think about the implications of that, how much brain drain has been done on society? Like, how much further could we be ahead if we didn't have to spend half our time being investors? Now, of course, Wall Street doesn't want to hear that, but imagine if we could just save our money, we didn't have to be investors, and we could just go solve problems and create things.
Yeah, it's so true. I interviewed a guy named Noah Kaufman, Dr. Noah Kaufman, and he told this great story that absolutely proves this point. He, doctor, obviously works his butt off, went through, med school, 7 years or whatever of intense work, and then started working. I think he was an ER doc, so that's kind of one of the most intense forms of medical service you can provide. And he, had some money, had money saved up. He didn't know what to do with it, right? And so he just kind of gave it to a financial advisor to invest, and he just was not happy with. He's a smart dude, was not happy with what the financial advisor was doing with it.
Right.
So he actually became a licensed financial advisor just to manage his own money. So
Right.
he learned all of that stuff and then became, licensed so that he could do whatever he wanted to with his own money, all self-directed. And that's exactly the point, right? He spent all those hours on top of being a doctor, where he could have, with all that energy that he expended doing
Right.
this, been an entrepreneur in other ways or whatever, and benefited society in even greater ways, thought more about his profession and contributed some sort of like new type of a medical service or way to approach solving health problems.
Right.
And he couldn't. So it's exactly right. And with Bitcoin, we have a way that allows us to store that value without having to think about all that stuff.
Right.
It's insane. And so that alone, imagine the benefit to society that will accrue just because of that alone.
Yeah.
And then, there's other ways that Bitcoin will, improve the efficiency of human civilization, society, and advancements by orders of magnitude.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we just can't even comprehend it. I think as humans, the problem with humans is that we can only imagine a better version of what we have today. We can't
Yeah.
imagine something new. So we have cars, well, flying cars, right? We can't imagine new things because we don't have the building blocks for those things. But I think hopefully we've made it clear to everybody listening that just like history, when we decentralized information and got a way to store value and trade freely, which even exploded the communication, it led to massive wealth and a boom for the civilization. And I see that setting up again today, but times like a million.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And this is the exponential evolution of human civilization. So it's happened all throughout history. I think it's been 600,000 years for the hominid, 100,000 years for man as we know it, 10,000 years of agriculture, 500 years of the Industrial Revolution, probably a little bit less than that, 50 years of the information age. So I think we're entering now a Bitcoin renaissance, a Bitcoin age that's going to be a complement, as Jeff Booth talks about in The Price of Tomorrow, a complement to these technologies that are deflationary, essentially, right? They're all the cost to manufacture any information-based, silicon-based technology is trending to zero, right? And if you pair that with a deflationary money, which you have to eventually, it's just math. You can't have an inflationary money in this environment. It's going to actually speed up its collapse. And so you pair those together, the exponential advancement of technology with a money that will just incentivize that advancement even further. We're talking about technologies that will allow people to live for hundreds of years, maybe even forever, like things that we can't imagine, like basically like near light speed travel, or maybe even light speed travel. It's physically possible. So we will have the fundamental basis through this light speed transfer of information, the development of AI, AI enhanced brains. It's crazy what's happening. So it's not just the money, but like you said, the transfer of ideas that's propagating and accelerating exponential rate, and then combined with a sound money, will just really lead to a flourishing of humanity.
Yeah.
Free up all kinds of time for us. Most people will have their needs met, basic Maslow hierarchy needs met, because of deflationary technology and a combination of Bitcoin making it, decreasing those prices, trend them towards zero even faster, for essentially free. And it's not going to have to be some government program through the collection of taxes. It's just going to be that way because we become so efficient, so productive, and that we can all kind of spread around the capture of that productivity that chart that I always point to of in 1971, the breaking of productivity from wages. So wages flatline, productivity continues apace. They had been lockstep up until the end of the gold standard. So we're not benefiting. You and I and most people are not benefiting from the improvements of productivity. That's all accruing to the 1.1, the 0.01%.
Yeah.
So having that more evenly distributed is going to give us all time to pursue our passions and perfect our crafts and think long term. It's going to really change everything.
Yeah. It's going to be an amazing renaissance again.
It is going to be an amazing Bitcoin renaissance.
Now, unfortunately, the path from here to there may not be so smooth, but there is hope on the other side. So that's a good message of hope, Brady. That's a super fun conversation. Like I said, I spend too much time focusing on doom and gloom. And so I do like to just stop and think about how great things are. So thanks for breaking that down for us. That was great.
That was great, man.
I know you got the podcast. We'll link to the Citizen Bitcoin podcast. Anything else you want to point people to that we can link down below?
Yeah, I host 2 podcasts. So Citizen Bitcoin's been around for a few years. There's a good 120, 130 episode archive there with interviews with some of the best Bitcoiners. It's fun to go back and listen to that archive. I had one of the first podcast episodes with Gigi, who is a great author, with Robert Breedlove, who's really exploded since then. Yeah. So it's fun. It's fun to go back and kind of hear their early thinking before they sort of before where they are now. Yeah. And then I also host the Swan Signal Live show. We publish it at Swan Signal Live podcast, swansignalpodcast.com, and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/swansignal. So those are the 2 shows I'm hosting. And of course, you can go to swanbitcoin.com and start stacking some sats. Yeah. It's that Renaissance money. Got to get some of that Renaissance money.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Brady. All right. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and sign it off. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.